Welcome to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos, where leaders discuss what's coming next in satellites and space.
Thanks for listening to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. Today's guest is Chris Pearson, Vice President, Space Products for Roccor. Chris, how are you?
Hi there, John. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Very good, very good.
You know, while many people in the industry are talking about your company, you've made a big splash with some of your innovations. But before we begin and talk about that, tell me about your background and the strange accent you have.
Yeah, it's funny. I get that a lot. I moved over from the UK about 15 years ago, but I'm still married to an English lady, and I think somehow I've managed to hold on to at least most of my accent. I guess I started about 20 years ago for Astrium, as it was then, or Airbus now. Doing a lot of spacecraft systems engineering. Moved over here 2004 and helped set up a US arm of a British space component supplier. So that's lithium-ion batteries for about 7 years. Ended up running the US side of Surrey, of SSTL, for a couple of years before moving on to Moog. And then, I had this opportunity with a startup, Roccor, close to home here in Colorado, doing a lot of advanced deployable systems, some thermal products as well. And it was a real fantastic opportunity. I've known the CEO, Doug Campbell, for a long time now. Great management team in place, and really it's been everything I could have imagined. It's been a fantastic couple of years, actually.
And you're very humble. You also have 2 master's degrees, 20 years experience, so you're positioned real well to take advantage of some of these new breakthroughs in technology that you have. Well, so how did it start? How did this company even start? Was it Campbell's idea, or what happened?
Yeah, it was founded about 2011. Originally, the founders were trying to move away from space. They both had been experienced in the space industry and were looking for something that was going to move a bit quicker and really capitalize on the advancements that they'd seen in these high-strain composites, these novel materials that we were trying to leverage, or the company was trying to leverage. The company sort of grew up really on a lot of SBIR type of work, but there was gradually a real pullback into the space community with contracts from DARPA and then some commercial work too. So as much as the folks were trying to do something different, it really seemed as there was a home for the technology within space. We had a sister company called I2C that we merged with in 2016, and that gave us some thermal expertise and thermal products that are very, very complementary with deployable systems. After that merger, there was really a boom. In the last sort of 2 years, 18 months or so, after I come on board, we've had a lot of growth. So we'll talk a little bit about a big commercial constellation that we're a supplier on, but we've also had a lot of success on some US government deployable spacecraft systems as well. The other side of the business, we're actually heavily into combat care as well. So we're doing some work for the Marine Corps and for the Army in areas such as eye trauma and also medevac kind of products as well. So these are litters to get folks from the field. So it's a very diverse company. As you say, I'm on the space product side, so I'm responsible for winning and executing those flight programs we have on board. But it's an interesting firm. There's an awful lot going on.
We'll talk about advanced deployable structures later on. You mentioned earlier SBIR, and it's not a British word. It's an abbreviation, and some listeners know what it is, and some people know it's Small Business Innovation Research Program. So tell me, did you experience that? Was that a good experience, a bad experience for you?
For the company, it's been fantastic. I mean, as you say, it's definitely not a British word. I'd worked in the US for probably about a decade or so before Roccor, and all the time it was either for large businesses or foreign-owned businesses, and so we weren't eligible to go after SBIR type of business. So the kind of idea of the scheme is to develop technologies towards an area where there's a real government need. There's various different agencies that kind of sponsor this. It's really early, low TRL or low technology readiness level, pushing the product, and then having someone actually commercialize it. That's really the end goal. So there's an ROI both for the agency but for the US economy as well. Small businesses are obviously a big engine. And yes, since coming to Roccor, I've just been really impressed with how well it's worked. Obviously, we've had some good technology developments, but there's been a real means to an end. So all of these big deployable products and programs that you're going to talk about, they really hinge on technology that was developed with the US government agencies, especially like Air Force Research Lab. We've taken that further. We've really applied it to both commercial and military applications. So for me, it's a great marriage between commercial and the government, and a great ROI for both the taxpayer and also an engine for growth for Roccor. So, yeah, I can't say enough about it. It's been a big part of the success of the business.
You know, Chris, I go to your website and I see words like advanced deployable structures, and it seems like, engineering talk. But then I go to YouTube and I type in your company name and I see what you guys are developing. It's pretty fantastic stuff. I mean, just looking at that YouTube video, I imagine someone in high school would want to go in engineering and work for you out there. I mean, this is really some amazing stuff you have, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. If you're familiar at all with how mechanisms typically work in space and deployables typically work, you have effectively components which look like Swiss watches. So lots of precision engineered peak parts, a very long bill of materials, and really processes, assembly processes that require an awful lot of touch labor, and all that adds up to time and cost. And yeah, you take a look at our website and we have these advanced materials that we can shape and fold in different ways, really store strain energy so that we can use the energy that's inside that compressed structure to actually deploy an entire system. So yeah, you've got these decreases in complexity, decreases in cost and mass, which are really kind of groundbreaking for space.
Chris, I think the sizzle for your company is some of these visual demonstrations of these deployable structures that you have. But I want to have you put on your business hat now. So take off your engineer hat, put on your business hat. So you're sitting next to someone on a plane. They turn to you and they say, well, what business problem does Roccor solve? Well, what's your little 30-second answer? What's the business problem that your company essentially solves?
Yeah, so going back to the description of those piece parts, what that means is that there's a long lead time on these items. There's an awful lot of engineering that's required up front. And it means that if you're in the kind of new space market where you're trying to really get product to space a lot faster and get a return on your investment faster, it gets very challenging. So what we're able to do is kind of really leverage the simplicity that comes from using these materials, cut down cost and cut down lead time, and get that product into space and actually returning revenue much faster than anything that was available before.
So your advances in engineering allow you to provide simple, low-cost components. Is that a good nutshell summary? It
is. I mean, you asked from a business point of view, and the kind of technical approach is half of the answer. I said at the very beginning of this, the founders were trying to get away from the sort of traditional kind of space market, and one reason for that is they were kind of a little bit tired and frustrated of how long it took for them to actually get products into market and be taken up. The sort of risk posture that was there about a decade ago has changed a lot. What you have now is the lower cost of access to space, the kind of proliferation of small satellites and what you can do with it. You have a lot more commercial folks that are trying to get into the market and actually utilize space. And for them to be able to do that, they need to get down cost. They need to get down lead time, and they're happy to take some more risk. So all those things added together meant that it was the right time for the technology. But in terms of the approach of actually getting it there, you needed a fresh face. You needed a bunch of folks that were able to operate in a different way from the old companies. We kind of pride ourselves in a lot of upfront co-engineering. That's kind of crucial in making this stuff work. When you have new entrants to space, when you have people that are trying to do things at like a different cost point, you can't just go to a component supplier with a rigid specification. You need to get in there early. You need to co-engineer together, and that requires investment from both sides. That kind of agility, that kind of openness, that's really from the business side as well as the technical side what's been a key ingredient for our success, a fresh approach to working together.
Well, your website has, I see the pictures of the fresh young engineers. They're collaborating and they're working with different concepts and everything else. But, when you come up with an idea for a product, how do you validate the opportunity? How do you know that this is really a square peg in a square hole?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's difficult. What you need to do is you need to be close to your customer base. I think that's one thing that the SBIR kind of program allows us to do. So a lot of the folks that are they call them kind of customer points of contact, if you like, they're also subject matter experts in deployable systems or thermal solutions. So what that means is when you're going through the SBIR process, when you're writing proposals, when you're having discussions, you're really getting down to the nuts and bolts of the end user, understanding what their problems are, really making sure there's a place for the technology, and it's not just going to be in search of a solution. But there's always a challenge. You've got to work out there how much to actually invest from like an IRAD point of view as well, an internal research and development point of view as well. For me, the principles are still the same. It's about customer intimacy and understanding their problems. So on the big commercial contracts, we actually, this is the big constellation I think we're going to talk about. We actually were working with that customer for about 3 years, I think it was, before we ever really had a full contract from them. We did an awful lot of work, which was performed on our own dollar. That was an investment. It allowed our customer to show maturity to their investors to kind of keep the program going. But all the way through that, there were other opportunities we could go for, and we had to stay focused and make sure we invested in the ones that we thought were most probable. And the only way you can really do that and really have an informed decision is, again, going back to that customer intimacy. So it's a challenge of the business, but I think that's one thing we're really good at. We get close to our customers, and it's a co-investment.
And it's great to have good technology and be close to the customers, but there's got to be, this word is thrown around all the time. It's unique, but there must be some special sauce or some capability that you have that is a differentiator from other companies in your business there.
Yeah, I think in our area, in terms of the actual technology on the deployable side, so talking about high-strain composites specifically, yes, there are other folks. I'd say there's probably at least 3 other companies in the world that are trying to do what we do. I think what sets us apart is not so much the technology itself. I think what sets us apart, our secret sauce, is actually the way we're structured as a business. So if I look at those other companies, they're either heavily VC-backed or they're existing aerospace entities with pretty established cultures. The beauty of Roccor, for me, is we're 100% employee-owned. It's a very, very flat management structure from top to bottom. I mean, really, there's between the engineers on the floor to the senior management team, to the execs, there's only about 2 or 3 layers there. So that gives you a level of agility, a quickness of decision-making, which I think our competitors just can't live with. And the other side of it is just the level of commitment we have from our employees here. Everybody is heavily invested in the success of the company and has a huge amount of pride what goes on here. And those are all very powerful elements when they come together. So yeah, having a sort of management team that's very, very close to what's going on the floor, being able to balance that long-term view, which often outside investors struggle with the space business. Space returns don't generally come in 12 or 18 months. They take a lot longer and require a lot more faith. Having the kind of level of control we have, like for me, that's the real differentiator. I think, there are some things technically we have that are different, and there could be advantages, but I think what our customers really appreciate is the way you do business.
I know you're from Leeds, and you may not have be familiar with a lot of these old TV commercials here in the United States. But back when you were a youngster, there was a TV commercial, and they got in the air and they said, "This is not your father's Oldsmobile." And when I think of that commercial, I think of old space, new space. You're involved in the world of new space, and you're saying, well, this isn't the old way of doing things where it took forever to get something done. So how do you compare old space and new space?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you talk to 10 different people in the space industry and you'll get sort of 10 different answers as to what new space is. I'll kind of give you my view. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of factors which have really come together at the same time that have allowed new space to kind of really come to the fore. It's not as if people haven't been trying to do things in a different way in space, but what's happened is you've got the ability to be able to really do it. So, in the past you've had a lot of space programs that are driven by government budgets. There's been a lot of kind of slowness to market. You have very big space assets which are launched on a onesie-twosie basis, and when you have that, each of those assets is a big dollar value. It has to work, and then the risk of change becomes prohibitive. And that's really, for me, changed with two or three things. The launch industry is dramatically different to 10 years ago. You have rideshare, you have the ability to be able to share the cost of launch, which wasn't really even feasible kind of 10 years ago. You've got these small launch vehicles which are coming through, and then you've got SpaceX, who are obviously bringing down the cost even for the established sort of launcher sizes as well. So you've got two things there, that drives down the cost to launch, and it also increases those opportunities to actually get to space. So that's the first thing. And then the second is, with small satellites, you're just able to do so much more with them than you could before. I mean, small satellites have been around for 15, 20 years, but they've been there as technology demonstrators. But things like use of commercial parts, the establishment of an actual supply base in that area. They're not just onesie twosies. That's really driven the cost down and the availability up. So that gives customers, be it the government or be it the commercial side, there's a whole lot of applications which just weren't even possible before, like AIS and radio occultation. And from the U.S. government point of view, they can now really do things like disaggregate their payloads on smaller spacecraft and up their resiliency by flooding space with more small sats. So you put those things together, and there's a whole bunch of opportunities that weren't there before, and people, to be successful in new space, have to be able to balance risk posture. For Roccor, meeting new space is like all about being able to work in an environment where one size is not necessarily all. And the first thing we do when we have a new customer is we really understand where that risk posture is. Where is that balance between cost and risk, and put something around that. And that is what new space is for me. It's the ability to really balance cost and risk. And I just don't think you had the ability to be able to do that a decade ago.
You use this word flooding. I want to maybe focus on that a little bit. There seems to be an industry move here for large LEO constellations, with maybe around 11 constellations in various stages of development here. It seems like that there's some challenges here with all these numbers out there that you didn't have before. So, there's new technology, there's new launch techniques, but there's new problems as well, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. I mean, from Roccor's perspective as a supplier, we're supplying solar array deployment systems into one of those constellations. So we've got to deliver enough of those systems for about 900 spacecraft over about a 3-year period. I've been involved in the space industry for a couple of decades, and the biggest build I was ever involved in was about a couple of dozens. So there's a great opportunity that comes with that. There's obviously a huge amount of hardware, but the real challenge for us is for you to be able to deploy a system of that size, you've really got to get the kind of cost point down to what you traditionally saw in space. And the main challenge is getting that cost down while also keeping the reliability at levels which are acceptable. Yeah, we've kind of gone with something in terms of trying to counter that or address that. Our strategy has been, we're not making volumes in terms of cars here. It's not as if we can get down to the kind of levels of automation, the levels of kind of disposable assets, if you like, that you can with the car industry. For us, it's more akin to kind of quantities you see in the defense world with things like missiles. Yeah. So we've taken a lot of their approaches. So, for instance, we use what's called a lot acceptance test approach, where we basically produce a large number of items so we can do that at a lower cost. And then we take a statistically representative subsample of that lot and basically do all the traditional tests that we would do for space qualification. So you've got a sort of marriage there of more commercial techniques and traditional space techniques. And the real challenge, and I'm still saying we're working through it, we don't have all the answers yet, is taking the best from the traditional space and also the best from the commercial side and kind of finding that compromise point. But it's really exciting. Yeah, it's a different world for us in the space industry.
Let me come up with a real simple illustration here. So I live in a small town in Virginia. There's a gas station on one corner, gas station across the street. If they start lowering prices, well, I win because prices go down. But sometimes that may not enhance one gas station's ability to survive. And so if you get in this battle of low cost per unit, this could impact, Constellation vendors' ability to survive, won't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we were very careful on this, and we continue to be careful that we haven't bet the business on any particular individual contract. And, the beauty of our success, I think, over the last couple of years has been how diversified we are. So we've set a price point that we're happy with. These constellations aren't all as active as maybe the press would believe. It's not as if they're all driving down prices in the way you described yet. Not quite a commodity. But what we have is these large recurring builds, as well as the kind of traditional aerospace kind of onesie twosies, higher value, higher reliability, more from the U.S. government as well. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely correct that if you just went all out to win that business and you accepted that you were going to take a huge amount of risk, I think eventually you'd be in trouble. But I think from speaking to other vendors that have gone after these commercial constellations, As that value kind of goes down, really you get to the point where, a lot of them have actually walked away. And it takes someone with a fresh business model, a fresh business perspective to us to actually make it a commercial success.
Well, it's a lot of information here. If you're listening to this podcast and you want to see a video, go to YouTube and type in Roccor Impact Video. It's a really good summary of everything Chris has just said over the last 20-25 minutes. We're running out of time here, and I'd like to thank my guest, Chris Pearson, Vice President, Space Products for Roccor. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. If you like this interview, please subscribe, tell a friend, and give us a review.